Okay, guys, hope all is well. We're continuing our Jewish leadership series. So, summary of what we did last time. So, we're talking about the different mitzvahs from the Torah of doing Kiruv, and then we talked about the idea that the Chafetz Chaim said when you're in a situation, he said, to repeat his words, when the fires of apikorsut, heresy, when people are ignorant of Judaism, they know nothing about Judaism, it's spreading throughout the land, and the flames of ignorance are consuming our brothers and sisters. When there's so many Jews who know so little, and some know nothing at all, then the obligation to teach falls upon anyone who knows anything. Again, this is the Chafetz Chaim say this. Chafetz Chaim is saying this. In other words, everyone must reach out to instruct others and to teach and to do kiruv and be a leader. And teach them about mitzvahs. And that's why, again, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, what do we say? He says, even if you know Aleph, teach Aleph. What do you mean? If the guy barely knows anything he should be teaching, we should give it to the professionals, give it to the rabbis who know the whole, who actually know how to teach. Why are you giving to some guy who's ignoramus who only knows one letter in the alphabet? Because the idea is that we're in such a fragile state that what did we say last time? We said that, in the Israeli wars, I don't know which war it was, when they were so low on manpower, they got even 16-year-old and 17-year-old kids to fight in the army. I think even Hamas right now, because Israel basically wiped out most of Hamas, killed a good vast majority of them. I don't know the exact percentages. They got to the point where they're sending 17-year-olds to go fight. Okay, but the idea is when you need to fight, you get anybody to fight. It doesn't matter how skilled, how trained. Everybody has to go out there. Okay, and the idea is that I'm not trying to say go learn one little letter and go teach you. No, obviously you got to build yourself up. But the point is that everybody has to participate. Everyone has to participate. But now for the guys here, for the people listening to this whole series is about, we're not just trying to be participants, right? We know we have to participate. We know we have to be a part of it. But that's not the goal. The goal is not just, okay, I'm going to be barely be ignoramus, barely teach people. I barely could give a class. No, that's not the point. The point is we want to build ourselves. We don't want to be just soldiers. We don't want to be just a soldier. Our goal is to become a general. Okay, and I said in the last class, I'm not going to repeat the whole last class, but I said the step to becoming a general in the Jewish army of Hashem, in the Kiruv army of bringing back Jews and bringing Mashiach and Mashiach's army, is step one is you got to fill up your own cup. And if you fill up your cup, you can fill other people's. But if you don't overflow your cup and you're just filling other people's cup, let's say you fill a cup up with grape juice, whatever, and you're filling everybody else's cup, your cup's going to be empty. Okay, it's not going to work. There's only so much you could do. You're limited. But if you're overflowing your cup, then all the cups around you will get automatically full with your cup still being full. So I said the step one is what? To get educated, to study Torah. And we went through all the areas of Torah. We talked about Tanakh, we talked about Mishnah, Gemara, Halacha, Musar, right? We talked about all that. Now, as a rabbi who's doing Kiruv, okay, I'll tell you, the people probably you're going to be dealing with, majority, they're not going to be on the level to learn Mishnah. They're not going to be on the level to learn Gemara. That might be too much for them. That might be too, as we say, OD. It's going to be too over. It's an overdose. It's too much for them. They're going to be like, what, Mishnah, Gemara? You're teaching me rabbinic laws that, So what's the idea with that? The idea is most of the time you're going to be teaching people, you have to focus on, practical stuff when you're teaching, okay? So obviously for your own self, learn everything. You got to be educated in all areas of Torah, philosophy, ethics, halacha, everything. You should be, focus on everything. But when you're teaching, okay, a lot of the times you're going to have to be teaching basic foundational Judaism, okay? So me, for example, you guys know this, right? When you learn with me, I always, I remember Reb Berkowitz was, teaching us in Kollel. He was giving a shir. I listened back to an audio of it, and Reb Berkowitz said there's an idea that if somebody's not a mamin, if someone's not a believer, and what do we define as a believer? Someone who believes in the 13 principles of Judaism. Then their mitzvahs are not mitzvahs. So if someone doesn't believe in any of the 13 principles, whatever, God, Torah, purpose, love, they don't believe in that kind of stuff. Okay, then even if they wrap tefillin, even if they even if they do anything, they don't get rewarded for it. Because how can you get rewarded for keeping Shabbat or keeping kosher if you don't believe that God exists or etc. So the idea is, Rav Yitzchak Berkowitz. Yeah, but he's not. He quoted Rav Moshe Feinstein. He quoted Gedolim. Rav Moshe Feinstein said, if someone says a bracha and they don't believe in God, it's just like they're chirping. It's nothing. It's not a bracha, right? So the idea is that the 13 principles of Judaism are the foundational idea. But when you meet most people, well, you're going to go, sometimes you're just going to talk to them about 13 principles, like Chabad, for example, right? How come Chabad, they're rapping tefillin on people? They're rapping tefillin on people might not even believe in God. So what are they doing? So the first step for them is they're thinking differently. First they have an idea of Pintaliyah, that there's no such thing as a Jewish atheist. Even if the guy says he's atheist, there's no such thing. But Reb Berkowitz said on that, which I remember him saying, is that sometimes you got to show, it's not about intellectual. Some people are intellectual, and that's what they like, and that's what gets them to the Judaism. But other people are not. I think most people, honestly, are not intellectual. And for them, it's all about, beauty, seeing the beauty of it, seeing how it's going to benefit their life in this world. But we'll talk more about that later. But the idea is, so Chabad first showed them the beauty of mitzvah, tefillin, Shabbat, whatever. The guy likes it. Okay, then he's going to, that's what's going to get him to the relationship more than the intellectual stuff. But whatever, we'll go more into that later. But what I'm trying to say is that when you learn, there's actually a halacha. Someone, I think Pirkei Avot said, I forgot exact source, but someone who learns just to learn is not going to remember something, better than someone who learns in order to teach. I even see this in my own learning. There's some stuff I learn, I know I'm not going to learn it with a guy. I just know I'm not going to learn. I'll give you a good example. When I'm learning the laws of sacrifices, I'm not going to be learning that with a student. I'm going to be learning with the student, again, 13 principles of Judaism. That's what I think is way more important, right? Based off of what we said, to become a mamin. First become a mamin, then you can teach somebody about mitzvahs. That's why when I give my classes, I try going through the 13 principles, right, in depth, not just saying it superficially. Then after, some guys I actually finish the 13 principles class with, and after that, I start teaching you about mitzvahs. I go through this book, Chafetz Chaim, mitzvahs that apply today. Because again, I think it's useless to teach a guy about mitzvahs when number one, he doesn't believe God gave it, or he doesn't believe the Torah from God. And number two, especially when a lot of mitzvahs, let's say he thinks rabbis made everything up, right? Or even the rabbinic law. So you have to, I don't want to teach him, okay, the halachas of Shabbat, and when I'm teaching him the rabbinic laws, he's questioning me and saying, oh, how do I know rabbis didn't make it up? So I first, learn with the guy for a whole year, or however long it takes, the 13 principles. Then when we learn laws of Shabbat, that question doesn't even come up, because he knows how it got passed down generation to generation from God to Moses till, the Mishnah to Gemara and whatever till today, till the Shulchan Aruch. Yeah? But the idea is that, going back. So the idea, what we're saying here is, okay, so what I'm trying to say is that when you're learning in order to teach, you will maintain it more. And even, when I was listening to in college to these, secular speakers on how to memorize stuff, they always said the best way of memorizing stuff and internalizing it is if you give it over. But not only giving it over and teaching it, but breaking it down and dumbing it down. So what I did is with my book especially, I took complex ideas, and instead of writing a 500-page book on, one topic, I took complex ideas and I dumbed them down. I wasn't trying to satisfy the intellectual when I wrote this book, because I knew the intellectual people, not every intellectual, but a lot of those people already are set in their minds, and they're not going to read a book like this and change. That's not how they're going to change. They need a lot more work than that. I wrote my book for the masses. I wrote my book, and I wrote it in a way that no matter what level you are, you can understand, even the most complex ideas, again, the Big Bang, this, that. So what I'm trying to say is that when you teach, so when you're learning yourself, so I'm just adding on to the previous class because I told you guys about the different types of learning. When you learn, yes, there's going to be some stuff you're going to, you're not going to teach at all, right? It could, Bezrat Hashem, you teach everything you learn. That should be the goal. But again, it could be most probably going to be in a situation, again, to teach them the entire Torah Kula is not, unless you're a Rebbe who's teaching 10 different students all day for your whole life, it's going to be difficult to get to there. So you got to find the topics, number one, that you resonate with, right? Again, if you're teaching stuff you don't like, how far is it going to go? You have to be passionate about it. Like me, when I teach these topics, I love these topics. I, on my free time, read about these topics, right? So you should be passionate about it. When you're learning, you should think, whatever I'm learning, it's in order to teach other people. And also when you're learning, you should think, what's the best way of, how can I explain this to a 5-year-old? How can I explain this to a little kid? Okay, but that's the mindset you should have when you're learning. Fine. Now, the next step to building yourself up so you could be a general. Okay, so step one we said is learning. Step two is what? Mitzvahs, right? You want to be a general in Hashem's army. Well, you got to know the mitzvahs. There's so many people that they can't even list you. If I told you list 30 mitzvahs from the Torah, they can't even list the mitzvahs. They don't even know what's a mitzvah from the Torah, what's a mitzvah from the Rabbanan, from the rabbis. They don't know the mitzvahs. Okay. Now, obviously, our whole goal in life is to do mitzvahs and connect to Hashem. That is, again, the word mitzvah comes from the word sevuta, which means connection. And even if you take the word mem, sadi, vav, hey, right? We know Hashem's name is Yud and a hey and a vav and a hey, right? That name means haya, hoveh, yeah, master of all, was, is, and always will be. So that name of God that we're not allowed to pronounce represents God as infinity, right? Above space and above time. You want to connect to the infinite, the only way of doing it is through mitzvahs. If you take the word mitzvah, which means an action that connects, mem, sadi, vav, hey, you do something called atbash, right? There's something called remazim. Remazim are like hints in the Torah. So there's numerical values, right? It's kind of like Morse code in the Torah. So if you take the word mitzvah, mem, sadi, vav, hey, mem is the 10th to last letter in the alphabet, okay? What's the 10th letter? So again, Aleph would correspond to Taf, Bet to Shin, right? And so on and so forth. So mem is the 10th to last letter. So do it, Aleph. So what's the 10th to the front, right? So Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dal, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud. So mem corresponds to Yud. So that's the 10th to last, and that's the 10th letter after Aleph, right? Yud is 10th letter. So mem equals Yud. Sadi is the 5th to last letter. What's the 5th letter in the alphabet? Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dal, Hey. So mem equals Yud. Sadi equals Hey. What do you get? Mitzvah gives you Yud, Hey, and Vav, Hey. What does mitzvah give you? It gives you Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei. It gives you Hashem's name. Do you see that? You see what I'm saying? So what is a mitzvah? It's an action that connects you to Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei, connects you to the infinite. There is no other way to connect to the infinite without doing mitzvah. Okay? So now, we know this, we all know this, there's 613 mitzvahs, okay? And when I say mitzvahs, by the way, there's not 613, okay, action. There's 613 ways of connecting to Hashem, but it's like a rope. And ropes, guys, are not made up of one thick string. Ropes are made out of a bunch of small strings. So when I say there's 613 mitzvahs, there's actually 613 categories of mitzvahs. Okay? And each category has what we call details, what we call halachas, right? So Shabbat. It's not just, keep Shabbat, right? there's, okay, the 39 malachot, what are they? And each of those 39 malachot have subcategories. Okay, what falls under that? They're general principles and rules and ideas that fall under that. So that's the general idea with mitzvah, right? Now, with mitzvahs, what I wanted to say is that obviously, with the mitzvah, okay, I keep Shabbat, so many people tell me I keep Shabbat, I keep kosher, right? But reality is they don't learn the halachas of the mitzvahs. And if you don't learn the halachas of those mitzvahs, you're not keeping those mitzvahs. So as much as you say, I keep Shabbat, okay, you keep one halacha, you don't go on your phone, you don't drive in a car, fine. But are you actually keeping Shabbat? There's so many people who went to Jewish school, they grew up in a Jewish community, and I don't want to, they call themselves a certain sect of Judaism, I'm not going to say the name, and they think, I keep Shabbat. But if you go to the guy and you actually know Hilchot Shabbat, laws of Shabbat, you see the guy violates Shabbat 24/7. He puts chapstick on Shabbat. He takes hot showers on Shabbat, right? Chapstick is smearing. You're not allowed to smear things. Taking hot showers is cooking water. You're not allowed to cook things, right? And also fire, right? The fire gets, to cook the water gets turned on, right? If you have a gas boiler. The guy, puts stick deodorant. That's a problem. There's so many things that on Shabbat he starts organizing his, the one day of the week to organize his room is Shabbat. I want to organize my room. That's, he could be doing borer. He's doing hachana. He's preparing for after Shabbat. The idea is that if you don't learn halacha, okay, you could be going your whole life. There's, again, so many different mitzvahs, Shabbat, kosher, whatever, and you didn't really keep the mitzvah, okay? And the idea with learning halacha is that, some people say, okay, so I got to learn everything in one day. Now, of course, you should every day have a seder, a set time to learn halacha. But let me tell you one thing, because this might be overwhelming, and I don't want someone to, hear this and be like, oh my gosh, I'm done, that's it, I don't know halacha, I might as well not keep anything at all, right? If you are actually trying to learn, let's say there's 3 volumes to the laws of Shabbat. And I'm on volume number 1, and I hit volume number 3. Now, if someone says, I'm never going to learn the laws of Shabbat, Hashem will hold him accountable for every law of Shabbat he didn't keep. He'll be held accountable because he didn't learn. But if somebody is on chapter 1 and he didn't get to chapter 3 yet, Hashem knows that he's not up to chapter 3. Hashem knew he just found out Shabbat yesterday, now he's learning the laws and he's trying to get better. And Hashem won't hold him accountable for not, let's say he didn't get up to chapter 2 and 3 yet, or volume 2 and 3 of the laws of Shabbat. He's still on volume 1. Volume 1, okay, whatever he learned, Hashem's going to hold him on. But because he didn't get to chapter 2 and 3 yet, not because, he was ignorant, and not because he neglected learning Torah, he just didn't get there yet. Hashem, again, with Hashem's calculations, Hashem is obviously not going to hold him accountable because he knows he didn't get there yet. He can't learn everything in one day, right? Compared to the person who says, I'm never going to learn. So again, we don't want to go our whole lives, especially if you want to be a general in God's army, right? You want to be the best soldier. You can't go be preaching to people. And again, we have Yetzer Hara. We're going to fail. We're going to make mistakes. There's no, there is teshuvah. Again, I'm not trying to say, be a perfect. There's no such thing as perfection, right? Even the tzaddiks, everyone makes sins, right? There's not one person that does good and never sins. People make sins. That's the world. That's the reality of life. We're going to follow. We have a Yetzer Hara. We're not perfect. If you were perfect, you wouldn't be here. But the idea is, you still want to try your best to maximize and keep every mitzvah to the T, to the detail. And the more you're perfect in your mitzvah observance and your halacha observance, okay, the more you will be connected to Hashem. Because again, the more strings you're going to have to your rope, the thicker the rope will be, the tighter your connection to Hashem. And by the way, for Mashiach, for example, I made a video about the 8 conditions of being Mashiach. One of the conditions of being Mashiach is you have to be a Torah scholar who keeps every mitzvah. So if you have some guy and he's claiming to be Mashiach, right, he's the captain of the army, and the guy doesn't keep mitzvahs. He doesn't even know how to, tie his shoelace on Shabbat. He breaks Shabbat by tying his shoelace because he makes a double knot, right? You can make a single knot. You're not allowed to make a double knot. How can a guy like that be Mashiach? He doesn't even know Mashiach's mission is to spread Torah and mitzvah to the world. It's to breach all the fences of, that people violated mitzvah. He's supposed to do Kiruv. How can you do Kiruv? How can you influence the world? How can you preach if you yourself are ignorant? It doesn't make sense. So again, we have to emulate that. If we want to be great, we got to be fully with mitzvahs, 100% there. Now, with that being said, again, so learn halacha. That's number 1. Now, what books do I recommend of learning halacha? I said it in the last class. Sephardim, I recommend Yalkut Yosef. I recommend Rabbi Yonatan Nachson's book. I recommend Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And obviously, you should get to the point where, you don't read books in English. We were just talking about this, before the class started. It's very, very important to build your Hebrew skills. This is also a part of it, right? If you're somebody who doesn't know how to read Hebrew, or you're learning how to read Hebrew, it's very hard in the beginning. It just, requires a lot of patience and, repetition, all that. But it's the greatest thing you could do is to learn Hebrew. Because if you read the Torah in English, you are missing out on so many different things. I can't tell you that when I read the English translation of the Torah and then I look at the Hebrew text, you miss everything. You're missing the point. Again, it's okay. Use English to help you to get translations and whatever. But I'm just saying is you gotta learn Hebrew. You gotta learn everything. The vocabularies, the roots, the prefixes, the stuff. Everything matters. Everything. Again, it's a divine book. Every single letter and word. Hashem told Moshe what to write, and I could get you one letter and give you a whole 5-hour speech on just one letter. Okay. For example, the last week's Parsha Noach, it said, Hashem, He sealed the deal of the flood. Why? Not because they're committing, sexual morality. Not because they were doing idolatry. Because they did Hamas. What does Hamas mean? You read Art Scroll. It says they committed robbery. Now, that's not the actual translation of Hamas. There's 3 types of words in Hebrew just for stealing: Geneva, Gezela, and Hamas. Right? There's multiple. There might be more words, but those are the words I know at the top of my head. There's a difference between those 3 words. God's not going to use 3 different words to explain something. So I think, again, if I'm not wrong, Geneva is is hidden theft. So if someone goes and he pickpockets somebody, nobody knows, or looking at someone's purse, he jacks $100 bill. That's called geneva, right? Gezela is robbery. That's full on. You're robbing a bank. Everyone sees you and you're stealing, right? That's gezela. And chamas. What does chamas mean? It means petty theft. Meaning, for example, you steal 1 penny. Right? You steal something insignificant. It said in the time of Noah, people were committing that. There was one guy holding a basket of peas, and everyone would take 1 pea. Now, 1 pea, how much is a pea? It's less than a pruta. It's less than a penny. It's very, very low. Halachically speaking, those people are not obligated to pay that person back. Although they committed stealing, they did the sin of stealing, but they're not obligated to pay that back. And you can't even take them to court because it's such a little amount. But guess what? One guy was walking with a basket of peas, and everyone takes 1 pea. The guy's homeless now. So you see, if you just read the English translation, you would have missed that whole point. You would have missed that whole idea of the Torah is trying to teach you what? That with big, what's the lesson? When you read that story, the lesson is Hashem destroyed. Why did Hashem destroy the world because of the flood? Because of the idolatry and because of the sexual. Those are way bigger crimes than petty theft. The answer is, one of the answers that you can learn, one of the lessons the Torah wants you to learn out from that situation is what? Is that when people do big crimes, everybody know when you do killing, stealing, it's wrong. So people, although they're doing it in the back of their mind, they know it's wrong, and eventually will do teshuvah. But when people do small crimes, they don't do teshuvah for it. Why? I stole a penny. What's the big deal? It's not a big deal, right? That's why Rambam says, right? You might think you have to do teshuvah in Hilchot Teshuvah for big stuff like adultery, big crimes. But no, you even have to do it for the stuff that you think are small, like gluttony. You have to do teshuvah for, right? Lust for, what is it called? Pursuit of money, that you're just money hungry. You have to do teshuvah for. Rambam said the small stuff you got to do teshuvah. So that was the whole lesson. The Torah used one word, chamas, to teach you that lesson. Okay, but again, if you only read the English translation, you would have missed that whole point. And again, there's so many other things: the hidden gematrias, hidden numbers, hidden letter skips. Right? Again, the thing I told you about mitzvah, yud ke vav ke, right? That whole thing, you would have never, if you did it in English, you could have never. Again, English has no holiness to it. Hebrew does. It's a divine language, right? The word, again, even in Hebrew, like the word ahava, the root word is hav. Love. How do you love someone? Hav means to give. Right? So again, I can give you so many examples of how Torah is such a divine language, and learning it in English, it won't do you justice. Again, you could use it as a an aid, right? But you really want to learn Hebrew, and that's the goal. A person should do his best to master Hebrew, to learn, biblical Hebrew, medieval Hebrew, like, from the Rishonim, Achronim, modern Hebrew, like, Rabbi Vadia's books, right? They're in modern Hebrew, right? Why? Because you want to be able to access, the juicy, like I said, the juicy stuff. In Baruch Hashem, there's English, there's English books that have translations. But if you want the juice, if you want the real juicy stuff, it's all in the Hebrew books. And if you could unlock that, it's an unbelievable thing. Okay, fine. But that's, again, so we finished, that was the Torah stuff. Again, going back to the mitzvah stuff. Okay, so the mitzvah stuff, we said 613, we said you have to keep all the details, learn all the halachas. Now, again, I highly recommend that this should be one of your goals. Get this book, Chafetz Chaim Sefer Mitzvot HaKatzar, okay? When I was, on my journey of becoming more religious, this is one of the first books I read. Why? Because this book, now, with the 613 commandments, we know a lot of them you can't do today. Not that they don't apply. If we had a Bet HaMikdash, you would do them. You'd be obligated. But we don't have a Bet HaMikdash. So until the Bet HaMikdash comes, we can't do that. But these are the mitzvahs. Chafetz Chaim brings down the commandments that can be observed today. I recommend, get this book, right? It goes through how many commandments here? Give me a second here. So the book brings down that there are 77 out of all the 613 commandments. There's, again, 248 positive and 365 negative commandments. Only 77 of the positive commandments can be fulfilled today without a Bet HaMikdash, and 194 of the negative commandments. Okay, not including commandments that are applying living in Israel, there are 26 of them. But the idea of being in Israel. But the idea is go through that list and master every mitzvah, and try your best to go through each halacha. First, again, when you're learning, by the way, this is something very important. I remember listening to not listening. I was reading Yalkut Yosef, the introduction. And it said there, Rabbi Vadia, and he was quoting his teshuvah. He wrote a whole responsa in Halichot Olam, I think. And he wrote the idea that, let's say someone tells you he only has 1 hour a day to learn. What does he learn in that 1 hour a day? Should he do Daf Yomi? Should he learn a Gemara? Gemara takes a long time. You don't cover so much learning 1 page of Gemara. Because Gemara is, 2,000, over 2,500 pages, right? So what do you do? Learn Gemara? What do you do in that hour? Rabbi Vadia said, the majority of your time should be spent learning halacha. If you have a lot of hours to learn, you're in yeshiva, bro, learn everything. But if you only have 1 hour a day to learn, let's say hypothetically, let's say 75%, I'm just making the number up, just halacha. Because halacha, you got to know at the end of the day what to do. How you keep kosher, mitzvahs. And then the other 15%, you should learn musar, right? Because musar, you need calm down your Yitzhahara, you need musar and hashkafa, okay? And then, mixed with philosophy, right? But again, obviously, make time to learn everything. But why not learn Gemara? Because Gemara is great. You need to learn Gemara. But the idea is, what's the whole point of learning Gemara? Oh, to just build your mind and make your brain sharp? Yes, that's of course the purpose of learning Gemara. But at the end of the day, the Gemara is to teach you the general principles so you can keep halacha. But if you're just learning 1 page of Gemara and you only learn 1 halacha in 5 hours, right? Then you're going to be your whole life. When I was in yeshiva, there was people literally, they're learning Gemara all day. But when they, for example, rice, the after bracha for rice is something called borei nefashot. These people are making ala michya on rice. Ala michya, you only make it on the 5 grains. That's such a classic, rookie mistake, as we like to call it. And the guy was learning Gemara all day. How can it be you're learning Gemara all day and you make such a rookie mistake? Yeah, because he doesn't learn halacha. I came to yeshiva and I wasn't learning Gemara. and I was learning halacha when I was becoming more religious, and I knew way more halacha than everybody in the yeshiva. Halacha is the goal. It's the key. It's the final thing. Now again, learn Gemara so you can learn halacha better. If you know how to learn, from the how you do sugyas, right? Sugyas are like, how you learn up a topic. So for example, let's say you're learning the topic of, cooking on Shabbat. So you go from the Tanakh, from the Torah, to the Mishnah, to the Gemara, to the Rishonim, to the earlier rabbis, to the Achronim, and then to the rabbis of our generation, right? You learn through the whole sugya, okay? That's the highest way of learning Torah. Learning from that route. Reb Berkowitz, by the way, when he does his sheets in the Kollel, it's all like that. It all follows that pathway. From Rishonim, from Tanakh to from Mishnah, Gemara, Rishonim, Achronim till the final. Like he brings down usually like Rav Moshe Feinstein or whatever. But the idea is that's the highest way of learning halacha. And when you want to do your mitzvah observance, that's the best way of going about it. Okay, fine. So learning halacha, doing the mitzvahs. There's a lot more to say about that, but that's with mitzvahs. Okay, so step one to becoming a general in Hashem's army, making yourself a perfect person that you could fill your cup and help other people, right, and overflow, is learning Torah. Step two is mitzvahs. Okay, so to learn the mitzvahs, again, memorize the mitzvahs, master them. Like, there's so many, again, unique mitzvahs. Like, there's a mitzvah that if an old person or Torah scholar walks by you, you're obligated to stand up for them. There's a mitzvah not to shave with the razor. There's so many different, there's a mitzvah to every time you're learning with a Torah scholar and their student, right? There's a mitzvah. It's called Divikut Hashem. There's so many mitzvahs, and we're doing mitzvahs our whole life, and you might not know you're doing a mitzvah. And let me get you this book. So I want to show you just a couple books. So first, let's go over this book here. Okay, these are in English. They are all available in Hebrew, but just because I know majority of people who are listening, only read English and not so much Hebrew. So this is one of the best books you could ever read. It's called Ka'asher Siva Hashem. This idea that there's a halacha, mitzvah sericha kavana. When you do a mitzvah, you have to have intent when you do a mitzvah. I'll give you an example. Let's say there's a mitzvah from the Torah that whenever you use a taxi or a haircut guy, whatever it is, when you have to pay a worker, to pay them on time. There's a mitzvah to pay your worker on time. Okay? Now, when you get a haircut and you're about to pay the guy, you're fulfilling that mitzvah of paying your worker on time. Okay? Now, if you go and you take the haircut and you pay the guy and you don't know it's a mitzvah, you don't get the mitzvah of paying your worker on time because you didn't know it's a mitzvah. Mitzvah sericha kavana, right? Now, there are mitzvahs that are obvious, like wrapping tefillin. You're obviously doing that because God told you. So that, even if you don't have in mind, you're not, by the way, if you have in mind, you're getting a higher level reward. For example, with tefillin and tzitzit and sukkah, these are the only three mitzvahs in the entire Torah there's two kavanas you have to have. One kavana is every mitzvah you do, you have to have in mind, ka'asher siva Hashem, as Hashem commanded, right? You're doing a mitzvah from God, okay? Or else, what are you doing? You're just doing something, and you have to connect it back to God. So every time you do a mitzvah, you have to have in mind Hashem told you. Now, these three mitzvahs, you have to also think the reason. So tefillin, you have to think the reason, right? That Hashem's omnipotent, powerful, He controls the world, exits of Egypt. Tzitzit, you have to remember the kavanah you have to have in addition to believing that God commanded you to wear tzitzit. Is also you have to have in mind that it's to remember, right? Uritem oto uschartem ekol mitzvotai. To remember and do all the 630 commandments. So every time I put my tzitzit on, and in addition to having in mind God commanded me to wear tzitzit or talit, whatever, I have in mind also to remember and do all the 613 commandments. And sitting in the sukkah, what does Shulchan Aruch say? The Jewish code of law. You have to have in mind that it's zecher ananei akavod, the clouds of glory, which that could either mean the actual clouds that God took us out, or the huts the Jews sat in. I think the halacha is you have to think about the clouds. That's the final halacha. Now, those mitzvahs, right? You have to think the reason. So again, if you do those mitzvahs and you don't think the reason, I think the bottom line halacha is you get reward. You get reward for doing it, but it's a lower level reward. Okay. Some opinions hold you don't get the mitzvah at all, which is crazy. But again, I don't think that's what we hold halacha. Now, so again, so eating matzah, it's obvious you're eating matzah because God commanded you to do it on the first night on Passover Seder, right? So that's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about there's a lot of mitzvahs you do in your life, again, like paying your worker on time. Like you would never know that's a mitzvah, or not shaving with the razor. If you never knew that, how are you supposed to get reward for not shaving if you don't even know it's a mitzvah? So I would make it a goal to go over this book. And again, I even read it, there's two types of learning. There's bikiyut and iyun. Bikiyut is fast-paced. So when I learn books, I usually go fast-paced. I want to cover everything because, learning in depth might take much longer. And then later on, I come back and I learn it more up in depth, okay? But I recommend that. I recommend this book. Again, it will tell you all the mitzvahs that, the idea of having, intent when you do a mitzvah. It will tell you a lot of mitzvahs you don't know about. But again, when you do mitzvahs, have intent. Okay, fine. And then, so again, we talked about the idea of kavanah, right? Having intent when you do mitzvahs, knowing and identifying the mitzvahs, right? So again, you should be able to, when you do a mitzvah, hey, I'm doing this mitzvah, hey, I'm doing that mitzvah, right? And again, you'll get to the point where it's not going to be like, weird, it's just natural. Like when I shave every week before Shabbat, I automatically know I'm shaving with the trimmer and not with a razor. So I automatically get that mitzvah. I'm not shaving with the razor, right? You're shaving, but you're not doing it with the razor. Or when I eat lettuce, I make sure that the lettuce is checked. So I get the mitzvah of, not eating, produce that has bugs in it, right? You're keeping that negative commandment of not eating bugs. So again, go through the mitzvahs that apply today, learn them up, fine. And we said here, have kavanah when you do the mitzvahs. Now, some of the books I recommend learning, like I said here, So again, look how many books there are. Like, look, this is a whole book on honoring your parents. All the laws of honoring your parents. By the way, if you go to the Shulchan Aruch, you'll find everything there. Okay, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is a great book to learn. Okay, Art Scroll has a good translation of it. I have it here also. Look, laws of kosher. Look how thick that this book is. You know, how are you gonna know the laws of kosher if you don't go through it? Like, you gotta learn laws of kosher. Okay, when you get married, B'ezrat Hashem, laws of nida, right? You gotta learn nida. Okay, Chafetz Chaim, laws of lashon hara. By the way, you know who wrote this? Oh no, there's not. There's another one Rav Berkowitz wrote. Okay, practical laws of Shabbat. Okay, I love, my favorite is Yalkut Yosef. This is Sephardi halacha. You know, even if you're Ashkenaz, you could technically still learn it, right? He kind of distinguished, but Yalkut Yosef, and you remember I showed you last time, there's an English version of it, right? But the idea is learn halacha, learn Musar. Again, for Musar, I recommend, you know, so many different books, Olam Hamidot, Shari Teshuvah, all that. Fine. So that's the idea. Let's finish off with mitzvahs. Okay, the next time I'm going to finish off there. The next time we're going to talk about the idea of. So we talked about Torah, we talked about Mitzvot. Okay, to be a master in your Torah, a master in Mitzvot. The next time we're going to talk about the idea of fixing your character traits. That's going to be the next topic, and then I'm going to go into different things that as a person, if he wants to be a general in Hashem's army to bring Mashiach, right? What he needs, what skills and talents, what things he needs to work on. We'll talk about public speaking. We'll talk about social media marketing. We'll talk about understanding body language. We'll talk about whatever different stuff, mental health awareness, right? What does a rabbi need to know to be the best rabbi and be the best makar? So B'ezrat Hashem, whoever is listening to this, please look at the things I send. Watch the previous videos if you missed them, and B'ezrat Hashem will continue on next time. Thank you so much for listening.
Hey, 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 say, toiler, hustler, do a miss or make a bracha, toiler, hustler, do a miss or make a